one of the problems with ownership is that we set goals that can be achieved. And the problem is, what do we do once we achieve them, right?
What's included in transcendence or in stewardship?
Yeah.
And how can we become stewards?
Yeah, and I think one way to understand stewardship is to look at examples where there isn't stewardship. So if you think about these two variables, someone who is fully invested in something bigger than themselves, what do you have when you have someone who's not invested and there's nothing bigger than themselves? And that's where you find consumers. To me, the opposite of stewardship is consumerism, or the opposite of consumerism is stewardship, right? But unfortunately, too often we live in a consumptive world. There's nothing bigger than myself, and there's no level of personal investment or engagement. And it leads to a consumption mentality. And you and I see that every day in estate planning. And it's unfortunate. The average American inheritance is consumed in 18 months. So, what people work and accumulate over the course of their lives is on average spent by the next generation in 18 months. Even among the highest net worth, the average half-life of inherited wealth, among the wealthiest Americans, the half-life is 8 years. So take what you inherit, cut it in half every 8 years. That's the average. And it's because we say, look, I'm going to give you something that costs you nothing and there's no meaning and purpose behind it. And it just invariably leads to consumerism. If you have someone who has transcendence, they see things that are bigger than themselves, but they lack the ability to invest or the willingness to invest, or they've never been asked. Those are what I call dreamers. Those are people we see those all the time. They're people who want to make a difference. They see the world as it should be, but they lack either the capacity or the willingness to invest and sacrifice for it. And then you have those who are fully invested. I call those owners. These are people who are all in. They're fully engaged, fully devoted. But ultimately, it's not about something bigger. And for them, the problem is they get to the end of the line. The business sells, the kids graduate and move on, and everything that they poured themselves into comes to an end. And then they lack that transcendent purpose or engagement.
Yeah, I speak to that a little bit, because tell me if these are examples maybe of that owner. You talk about the consumer, which it seems like the world today and all the advertising and online, the world that we are part of is creating consumers out of us.
Yeah.
It's really incentivizing us having that type of a behavior.
Yeah.
A dreamer wants to aim at something higher, but maybe not necessarily able to do so or not have the willingness to do so. Yet an owner, they take the initiative, they build something, they do something, they invest in something, and they've got skin in the game and they may be successful in it. I see kind of two contrasting examples to that. One might be, well, it's the parent who invests their whole life in their kids, and then the kids graduate and go to college, and now they say, well, who am I?
Yeah.
Their whole entire identity was with their kids. Or contrast that with, you and I see this all the time, where somebody creates a business that's wonderful, successful, meaningful, lucrative, and then they may sell their business, and then they have the post-sale blues, because their entire life and identity and time and sacrifice was all isolated in that one thing, which isn't necessarily negative in any way, but now that's gone.
Yeah.
Right. So talk about how we go beyond that.
Yeah, I think you said you talked to Lee Brower on an earlier podcast, and he's one of just such an example to me, and helped start me thinking differently. One of the things that he says, and I'm going to butcher what he says, so I may get an email from him, but he says the biggest threat to thriving is arriving. And one of the problems with ownership is that we set goals that can be achieved. And the problem is, what do we do once we achieve them, right? And that's why 70% of business owners regret selling their business within a year of the sale. And you think, oh my gosh, you built your business, it's worth all this money, you sold it, you've got it all, and you achieved everything. And what they realized was, yeah, I achieved everything. And it's done, it's finite. One of the paradoxes of a steward is that they seek to achieve the unattainable. And because what they have is something that's bigger than themselves, but that counterintuitively leads to a level of peace, because they have a direction as opposed to a destination. Destinations can be arrived at, and then what? But directions are, it's the eastern sky, and there actually becomes a level of a peace that comes from that. Again, we talked earlier to mention Martin Luther King. What he sought to achieve was practically unattainable, at least within his generation. But by taking on something bigger than himself, it gave him a direction to continue to go in, as opposed to something that can be achieved. And when you take into those elements of past, present, and future, it actually can lead to a lot of peace, that establishing goals that can be achieved often end up leaving you hollow and disconnected.